Chaos erupted in the narrow aisle of the first-class cabin. Smartphone cameras flashed like strobe lights as 3 uniformed officers wrestled a 19-year-old girl from her seat. She wasn't fighting back, yet the head flight attendant screamed that she was a threat. Passengers gasped, some filming, others cheering the removal of the delinquent. But the jeers died instantly when a man in a bespoke charcoal suit blocked the jet bridge door. He didn't look like a passenger. He looked like he owned the sky. He stared at the handcuffs on the girl's wrists, then looked at the trembling purser and said 5 words that froze the blood in everyone's veins. "Take your hands off my daughter." The recycled air inside Aerolux International Flight 882 smelled of expensive leather and fresh lavender. It was the signature scent of the airline's flagship Royal Class service, a scent that usually signaled relaxation for the wealthy elite boarding at JFK Airport. For 19-year-old Mabel Sinclair, however, it just smelled like home. Mabel adjusted the noise-cancelling headphones over her ears, pulling the hood of her faded, oversized university sweatshirt further down her forehead. She wasn't trying to hide. She was just exhausted. Finals week at Columbia had been a brutal marathon of sleepless nights and caffeine. And now, finally, she was heading to London to meet her father for a much-needed summer break. She curled into seat 1A, the most coveted spot on the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. It was a private suite with sliding gold leaf doors, a personal wardrobe, and a seat that converted into a queen-sized bed. Mabel kicked off her sneakers, revealing mismatched socks, one with avocados, the other with tacos, and pulled her knees to her chest. She just wanted to sleep before the plane even taxied. Passenger boarding continued. The cabin began to fill with the rustle of silk suits, the click of designer heels, and the hushed tones of old money. Then, the peace shattered. "Excuse me? I think there is a mistake." The voice was shrill, cutting through the ambient jazz music like broken glass. Mabel didn't react immediately, assuming the woman was speaking to a flight attendant. "Hello? Young lady, I am speaking to you." A manicured hand with a diamond ring the size of a grape tapped aggressively on Mabel's shoulder. Mabel flinched, sliding her headphones down around her neck. She looked up. Standing over her was a woman who looked as if she had been dipped in liquid gold and hardened. She wore a tweed Chanel suit, a pearl necklace that probably cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. This was Gwendolyn Preece, a socialite known in Manhattan circles for 2 things: her husband's money and her legendary temper. "Can I help you?" Mabel asked, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. Gwendolyn scoffed, turning her head to scan the cabin as if looking for an audience. "You are in my seat. 1A. This is the seat I specifically requested." Mabel blinked, confused. She reached into the side pocket of her hoodie and pulled out her boarding pass. She glanced at it, then back at the woman. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is 1A. My name is on the ticket." "Don't lie to me," Gwendolyn snapped. She didn't even look at the ticket Mabel held out. "This is first class. The crew rest area is in the back, or perhaps down in the cargo hold for all I care. You are clearly a staff member's child flying on a standby pass, or you've simply snuck in here while the attendants weren't looking. Now get up." Mabel straightened her posture. The exhaustion was fading, replaced by a cold prickle of irritation. "I'm a paying passenger. I'm not moving." "Roger!" Gwendolyn shouted, waving her hand frantically. "Roger, get over here immediately!" Roger Holloway, the flight's head purser, hurried down the aisle. Roger was a man who prided himself on the order and exclusivity of his cabin. He had been flying for 20 years and believed he could spot riffraff from a mile away. When he saw Gwendolyn Preece, a Platinum Medallion member and frequent flyer, standing indignantly over a young black girl in a hoodie, his bias kicked in before he even asked a question. "Mrs. Preece, what seems to be the problem?" Roger asked, his voice dripping with professional syrup. "This person," Gwendolen gestured at Mabel as if she were a stain on the upholstery, "refuses to vacate my seat. She claims she has a ticket. I demanded she leave, but she is being belligerent." Roger turned his gaze to Mabel. His smile vanished, replaced by a stern, schoolmaster frown. He looked her up and down, noting the sneakers, the messy hair, and the hoodie. In his mind, the calculation was simple. One of these people belongs in first class. The other does not. "Miss," Roger said, his tone dropping an octave, "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." Mabel sighed, holding the slip of paper out again. "I already told her. I'm in 1A. Roger snatched the pass from her hand. He squinted at it, tilting it under the cabin lights. It read, Emma Sinclair. The class code was F for first. It looked legitimate, but Roger knew that systems glitched and people printed fake passes all the time, or perhaps she had stolen it. "Sinclair," Roger muttered. He tapped his tablet, scrolling through the manifest. There was indeed a Sinclair listed in 1A, but there was no way this girl was that Sinclair. The ticket had been purchased with a corporate black card, linked to the highest tier of the airline's VIP list. "This ticket was purchased by the executive office," Roger said, his suspicion deepening. "How did you get this?" "My father bought it for me," Mabel said calmly. "Can I have it back, please?" Gwendolen let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Her father? Oh, please." "Roger, don't tell me you believe this. She probably found it on the floor in the terminal. Or maybe she's the nanny for the real passenger and thinks she can sit here until they arrive." "I am not a nanny," Mabel said, her voice hardening, "and I suggest you stop talking to me like that." "Is she threatening me?" Gwendolen gasped, clutching her pearls theatrically. "Roger, did you hear that? She threatened me. I don't feel safe flying with this aggressive behavior next to me." Roger's face went red. He couldn't afford a scene with a Platinum member. He needed to solve this, and the path of least resistance was removing the girl who didn't look the part. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your things," Roger commanded. "We need to verify this ticket at the gate podium. You cannot remain on the aircraft while we do that." "Verify it here," Mabel challenged. "You have a scanner. Scan it." "The scanner is malfunctioning," Roger lied smoothly, "and frankly, your attitude is becoming a disruption. Mrs. Preece is a valued customer, and you are upsetting the cabin." "I haven't done anything." Mabel stood up, and for the first time, her height was apparent. She was tall, athletic, and imposing. "I am sitting in the seat I paid for. She is the one yelling." "Sit down," Roger barked, losing his composure. "You are failing to comply with crew instructions. That is a federal offense." Other passengers were watching now. A businessman in 2B lowered his newspaper. A celebrity in 2A peered over her sunglasses. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. "I'm not getting off this plane," Mabel said, her voice shaking slightly but her eyes fierce. "Call the captain. Call whoever you want. But I am not moving for her just because she doesn't like the way I look." Roger sneered. "Have it your way." He turned on his heel and marched toward the cockpit, pulling out his interphone. "Captain, we have a security issue in first. Non-compliant passenger refusing to deplane. Possible fraudulent ticket. Requesting LEOs immediately." Mabel sat back down, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Gwendolen, who was now smirking, settling into the empty seat across the aisle, seat 1K, as if she had already won. "You should have just moved to the back, honey," Gwendolen whispered loudly. "Now you're going to jail." Mabel reached for her phone. She needed to text her dad. But before she could unlock the screen, heavy boots thudded on the jet bridge. The entrance of the Port Authority police officers shifted the atmosphere in the cabin from tense to terrifying. There were two of them, Officer Miller, a burly man with a buzz cut and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite, and Officer Kowalski, younger, nervous, his hand hovering near his belt. Roger met them at the door, whispering furiously and pointing a shaking finger at seat 1A. "She's belligerent. She's refusing crew instructions, and we suspect the ticket is stolen," Roger told them, amplifying the situation to justify the call. "Mrs. Preece there feels threatened." Officer Miller nodded and marched down the aisle, his tactical vest bulky in the confined space. He stopped at row 1. "Ma'am, you need to grab your bags and come with us. Now." Mabel looked up, her phone still in her hand. She had managed to send one text. SOS. Plane. Help. "I didn't do anything wrong," Mabel said, her voice trembling. "I have a ticket. That woman is harassing me." "We can sort that out on the jet bridge," Miller said, his voice void of empathy. "Right now, the pilot wants you off the plane. Once the pilot says you go, you go. That's the law." "But it's my seat," Mabel insisted, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "Why aren't you listening to me?" "Last warning," Miller growled. He reached into his belt and unclipped a pair of zip-tie handcuffs. "Walk off, or be dragged off." "This is insane," the businessman in 2B spoke up. "She showed her ticket. Why don't you just check the manifest?" "Stay out of this, sir, or you'll be joining her," Miller snapped without looking back. The businessman fell silent, cowed by the threat. Gwendolyn Preece watched with a satisfied grin, sipping a glass of pre-flight champagne that another flight attendant, intimidated by the chaos, had instinctively handed her. "Go on, officer. Do your job. She's dangerous." Mabel gripped the armrests. She knew her rights, or she thought she did. She knew she hadn't broken any laws. She decided to hold her ground. "I am not leaving." That was the trigger. Miller lunged forward. He grabbed Mabel's left wrist, twisting it sharply behind her back. Mabel cried out in pain. "Ow! You're hurting me!" "Stop resisting!" Miller shouted, utilizing the standard phrase to justify the force. Kowalski moved in from the other side, grabbing her other arm. They yanked her out of the seat. Mabel's headphones clattered to the floor. Her phone slipped from her fingers and slid under the seat. "My phone!" she screamed. "Let me get my phone!" "Forget it!" Miller yelled. They dragged her into the aisle. Mabel's legs tangled in the carpet. She stumbled, and they didn't wait for her to regain her footing. They began to drag her, her sneakers squeaking against the floor. The cabin went into an uproar. "Hey, that's a kid!" a woman in row 4 shouted. "You're hurting her! Stop it!" Phones were out everywhere now. The passengers in economy, peering through the curtains, were filming the scene. The optics were horrific. 2 armed white officers physically dragging a young black woman down the aisle of a luxury plane, while a wealthy white woman sipped champagne and watched. Roger stood by the galley wall, arms crossed, trying to look authoritative. But a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. He noticed the cameras. This was going to be a PR headache, he thought. But he reassured himself. She was a fraud. She had to be. Once they proved the ticket was fake, the internet would calm down. "Get her off! Get her off!" Gwendolyn chanted, clapping her hands once. Mabel was sobbing now, the humiliation burning hotter than the pain in her twisted shoulders. "Dad! Dad!" she cried out, an instinctive plea for the only person who could fix this. "Daddy can't help you now," Miller grunted, shoving her toward the exit door. They reached the galley area. The open door of the aircraft revealed the ribbed floor of the jet bridge. The cool air from the tunnel hit Mabel's face. "Stand up and walk," Kowalski said, trying to be slightly gentler than his partner. Don't make us carry you." Mabel struggled to her feet, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You're making a mistake. A huge mistake." Yeah. Tell it to the judge," Miller said. They pushed her onto the jet bridge. The plan was to take her to the holding room, book her for disorderly conduct and trespassing, and ban her from the airline. Roger stepped out onto the bridge behind them to hand over her carry-on bag, which he had hastily retrieved from the overhead bin. "Here," Roger said, tossing the bag at Mabel's feet, "and don't bother trying to rebook with Aerolux." Gwendolyn poked her head out of the plane door. "Good riddance, and take a bath." It was the ultimate degradation. Mabel stood there, wrists bound, hair disheveled, surrounded by people who hated her for simply existing in a space they felt she didn't belong. But the procession didn't make it to the terminal. At the top of the jet bridge ramp, the heavy security door, the one requiring a keycard access from the terminal side, swung open with force. 3 men in dark suits stepped through. They weren't police. They moved with a different kind of precision. Flanking them were 2 airport directors, looking pale and terrified. In the center of the group was a tall man with silver-fleshed hair and eyes that looked like cold steel. He wore a suit that cost more than Roger made in a year. He wasn't running, but his stride was long and purposeful, eating up the distance between the door and the group of officers. Officer Miller stopped, confused by the blockade. "Step aside. Police business." The man in the center didn't step aside. He stopped 3 feet from Miller, his gaze dropping instantly to the zip ties digging into Mabel's wrists. His jaw muscles bunched. "Dad?" Mabel whispered, her voice breaking. The man looked up at Miller. His face was a mask of controlled fury, the kind of calm that precedes a hurricane. "Release her," the man said. His voice was low, but it carried a resonance that made the metal walls of the jet bridge seem to vibrate. "Who are you?" Miller demanded, putting a hand on his holster. "Back off, sir. This suspect is under arrest." Roger, standing behind the police, squinted. He recognized the man. He had seen his face in the mandatory corporate training videos. He had seen his portrait hanging in the lobby of the headquarters in Dallas. Roger's stomach dropped through the floor. He felt bile rise in his throat. "Oh, God," Roger whispered. The man ignored Miller and looked past the officers, locking eyes with Roger. "My name," the man said, "is Robert Sinclair. I am the CEO of Aerolux International, and that suspect you are manhandling is my daughter." Silence slammed into the jet bridge. It was absolute, suffocating silence. Miller's grip on Mabel's arm loosened involuntarily. Kowalski took a step back. Gwendolyn Preece, who had been leaning out the door to watch the show, froze. Her champagne glass tilted, spilling sticky liquid onto the expensive carpet. But she didn't notice. Robert Sinclair took a step forward, invading Miller's personal space. "I said, take your hands off my daughter. If she has a bruise, even a scratch, I will spend the next 10 years making sure you never work as a mall cop, let alone a police officer. Unlock her. Now." The silence on the jet bridge was heavy, broken only by the hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit and the ragged breathing of Roger Holloway. The flight purser looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His eyes darted from the furious CEO to the sobbing girl, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the hoodlum he had just evicted with the daughter of the man who signed his paychecks. Officer Miller, however, was slower to grasp the shifting tectonic plates of power. He was a man used to being the ultimate authority in any room he entered. He looked at Robert Sinclair with a sneer of disbelief. "I don't care if you're the Pope," Miller spat, though his hand drifted away from his holster. "You're interfering with a police action. Step back." Robert didn't blink. He didn't shout. He simply turned his head slightly to the man standing to his right, the Port Authority Director of Operations, Mr. Henderson, who looked like he was about to faint. "Henderson," Robert said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Does this officer have jurisdiction on my aircraft once it is at the gate and under my operational control?" Henderson swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "Technically, well, if there is a threat." "Is there a threat?" Robert asked, gesturing to Mabel, who was still pinned against the wall by Kowalski, though the officer's grip had loosened significantly. "Does my daughter, a 19-year-old pre-med student at Columbia University, look like a threat to national security?" "No, sir," Henderson squeaked. He turned to Miller. "Officer, stand down, immediately." Miller bristled. "She refused to deplane. That's federal." "She refused to leave a seat she paid for," Robert corrected, his voice dropping to a growl. "A seat I paid for. Now, I told you to cut those zip ties. If you don't do it in the next 5 seconds, I will have the Aerolux legal team, which, I might add, is larger than your entire precinct, file a suit against you personally for assault, battery, false imprisonment, and kidnapping. You will lose your pension, you will lose your house, you will lose everything." Miller hesitated. He looked at his partner, Kowalski. Kowalski, realizing the gravity of the situation, immediately let go of Mabel and reached for the wire cutters on his belt. "I'm cutting them," Kowalski said quickly. "Hold still, miss." Snip. The plastic ties fell to the floor. Mabel gasped, rubbing her wrists where angry red welts had already formed. Robert closed the distance instantly, wrapping his arms around his daughter. She buried her face in his expensive suit, sobbing uncontrollably. The smell of his cologne, cedar and old books, was the first thing that made her feel safe in an hour. "I'm sorry, Dad," she wept. "I tried to show them the ticket. They wouldn't look." "I know, May. I know." Robert kissed the top of her head, his eyes scanning the red marks on her skin. When he saw the bruising beginning to bloom on her forearm, his expression hardened from anger into something much more dangerous. Resolve. He gently let go of Mabel and turned to Roger Holloway. Roger was trembling. He had backed up against the curved wall of the tunnel, clutching the manifest to his chest like a shield. "Mr. Sinclair?" Roger stammered, his voice cracking. I had no idea. The protocol. She didn't look like what?" Robert cut him off. He took a step toward the purser. "Finish that sentence, Mr. Holloway. She didn't look like she belonged in first class. Is that it?" No, I meant," Roger floundered. "Mrs. Preece was very insistent. She's a platinum member. She said the girl was aggressive." "Mrs. Preece," Robert repeated the name, tasting the venom in it. "And you took the word of one passenger over the valid ticket of another? Did you scan her boarding pass?" "The scanner?" Roger gulped. "I thought it was malfunctioning." "Give it to me," Robert demanded, holding out his hand. Roger hesitated, then handed over the mobile scanning device. Robert took Mabel's crumpled boarding pass from her hand. He held it under the laser. Beep. The screen flashed bright green. Seat 1A. Sinclair, M checked in. Robert turned the screen so Roger could see it. "Works perfectly. You didn't scan it because you didn't want to be wrong. You saw a young black girl in a hoodie and decided she was the problem. You let your bias pilot my plane." "Sir, please," Roger begged, tears actually forming in his eyes now. "I've been with Aerolux for 20 years. I have a pension. I have a family." "So does she," Robert said, pointing to Mabel. "And you had her dragged out like a criminal." Robert turned to Henderson again. "I want the jet bridge retracted. Nobody leaves this plane. Nobody boards. Ground flight 8082 immediately." "Ground it?" Henderson asked, shocked. Sir, a cancellation will cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars. The connection's in London. I don't care if it costs 10 million, Robert said. This plane doesn't move until I get to the bottom of what happened in that cabin. And I want the airport police supervisor down here, now. He turned back to Miller and Kowalski. And get out of my sight. If I see either of you near my daughter again, I'm calling the FBI to file civil rights charges. Miller opened his mouth to argue, but Kowalski grabbed his arm and dragged him back up the ramp toward the terminal. They knew when they were beaten. Robert put his arm around Mabel's shoulders. Are you okay to go back in there? Or do you want to go home? Mabel looked at the open door of the plane. She saw the faces of the flight attendants peering out, pale and terrified. She thought about Gwendolyn Preece, sitting in there, sipping champagne, thinking she had won. Mabel wiped her eyes. She straightened her spine, channeling the same strength her father was projecting. No, Mabel said, her voice raspy but firm. I want my seat back. Robert smiled, a cold, predatory smile that promised retribution. Good girl. Let's go get it. The atmosphere inside the first-class cabin was confused. The passengers knew something had happened. The shouting had stopped, but the plane hadn't pushed back. Gwendolyn Preece was busy texting her friends, typing furiously with one hand while holding her refilled glass of champagne with the other. Can you believe it? She said loudly to the man across the aisle, a tech entrepreneur named David who was editing a video on his phone. They let just anyone in here these days. Probably a drug dealer's kid. David didn't look up. Actually, I think you should be quiet. Excuse me? Gwendolyn bristled. I am the victim here. I was threatened. You weren't threatened, David said, finally looking at her. I recorded the whole thing. She offered to show her ticket. You screamed at her. Gwendolyn rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You're just trying to be woke. The police took her away. That proves I was right. At that moment, the cabin door opened. Roger Holloway did not walk in first. Instead, Robert Sinclair stepped through the entryway, his presence filling the cabin. He was followed by Mabel, who walked with her head held high, though her eyes were red-rimmed. Behind them came two large men in suits, Robert's personal security detail, who took up positions by the cockpit door. The cabin went silent. Gwendolyn lowered her phone. She squinted. She recognized the girl, but she didn't recognize the man. What is this? Gwendolyn snapped. Why is she back? Roger! Roger, I thought we settled this. Robert stopped at row 1. He looked down at Gwendolyn. Roger is no longer in charge of this flight, Robert said smoothly. In fact, Roger is currently suspended pending an investigation into gross misconduct. Gwendolyn scoffed. And who are you? Her lawyer. I am the owner of the seat you are currently occupying, Robert said. He gestured to seat 1K, which Gwendolyn had claimed, leaving her original seat assignment in 2A empty. And I am the CEO of this airline. The color drained from Gwendolyn's face so fast it looked like a magic trick. She choked on her breath. The CEO? Robert Sinclair, he clarified. And this is my daughter, Mabel. A collective gasp went through the cabin. The celebrity in 2A, a famous actress named Chloe, pulled her sunglasses down. No way, she whispered. Robert continued, his voice projecting to the entire cabin. It has come to my attention that a passenger in this cabin decided to harass my daughter, incite a panic, and use the police as a personal weapon to enforce her own prejudices. I am here to clarify the facts. He looked at Gwendolyn. Mrs. Preece, you claimed my daughter was in your seat, correct? I requested 1A, Gwendolyn stammered, her arrogance replaced by a frantic need to spin the narrative. My travel agent. There must have been a mix-up. I simply asked her to move. She was very rude, Mr. Sinclair, very aggressive. I felt unsafe. "Liar!" The shout came from row 2. It was David, the tech entrepreneur. He stood up, holding his phone high. "Mr. Sinclair," David said. "I have a video, start to finish. The girl was asleep. This woman woke her up, poked her, and called her riff-raff. Your daughter was polite the entire time." "I have it too," Chloe, the actress, chimed in. "I was live streaming to my Instagram. 2 million people just watched your purser drag her out, while this woman laughed." Robert turned back to Gwendolyn. His expression was one of mock pity. "It seems the jury has spoken, Mrs. Priest." Gwendolyn was trembling now. "Mr. Sinclair, please. I am a platinum member. I spend $50,000 a year with this airline. I demand some respect." "You want respect?" Robert asked. "Respect is earned. You treated a 19-year-old girl like garbage because you didn't like her hoodie. You humiliated her." I can apologize," Gwendolyn offered weakly. "I'm sorry, dear. It was a misunderstanding." Mabel stepped forward. She looked at the woman who had caused her so much pain. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Mabel said softly. "You wanted to hurt me, and you did." Robert placed a hand on Mabel's shoulder. "Mrs. Priest, Aerolux values its customers, but we value human dignity more. As of this moment, your platinum status is revoked." "You can't do that!" Gwendolyn shrieked. "I can," Robert said. "I just did. Furthermore, you are banned for life from flying Aerolux and all our partner airlines. That includes British Airways, Iberia, and Qantas. You're going to find it very difficult to get to Europe." You're kicking me off?" Gwendolyn gaped. "Oh no," Robert said, checking his watch. "I'm not just kicking you off. I'm having you arrested." "Arrested?" Gwendolyn stood up, knocking her champagne glass over. "For what?" "Interfering with a flight crew, filing a false police report, and assault." Robert pointed to the bruise on Mabel's arm. "You poked her. That's battery. And when you lied to the police to have them drag her off, you committed a felony." As if on cue, the 2 airport police officers from before, Miller and Kowalski, reappeared at the door. But this time they weren't alone. They were accompanied by a police supervisor, a stern woman with a captain badge. "Officers," Robert said, nodding to the supervisor. "That is the woman who filed the false report causing the disturbance." The supervisor stepped forward. "Gwendolyn Priest?" "This is ridiculous. Do you know who my husband is?" Gwendolyn shouted. "Stand up, Mum," the supervisor said. "You're coming with us. I will sue you. I will sue this entire airline." Gwendolyn screamed as Miller, looking very reluctant, but following his supervisor's orders, approached her. "Grab her bag," Miller muttered to Kowalski. The scene was a mirror image of what had happened 20 minutes prior. Gwendolyn was escorted out, kicking and screaming, her Chanel suit twisting as she fought the officers. "Get your hands off me! I am a priest! Roger, do something!" But Roger was nowhere to be found. He was currently in the galley, weeping into a napkin as he filled out his resignation paperwork. As Gwendolyn was hauled off the jet bridge, the cabin erupted into applause. David clapped. Chloe clapped. Even the flight attendants, who had been terrorized by Gwendolyn for years, clapped. Robert raised a hand to quiet them. "I apologize to everyone for the delay," Robert said to the passengers. "We will be departing shortly. Drinks are on the house for the duration of the flight. And for your trouble, everyone in this cabin will receive a voucher for a free round-trip first-class ticket to anywhere we fly." A cheer went up. Robert turned to Mabel. "Sit down, sweetheart. You've got a flight to catch." "You're not coming?" Mabel asked, panic flickering in her eyes. "I have to stay here and deal with the police report and the media," Robert said gently. "But I'm sending my head of security, Mr. Evans, with you. He'll sit in 1K. You'll be safe." Mabel nodded, sinking back into seat 1A. It felt different now. It felt like a throne. As Robert turned to leave, his phone buzzed. It was his PR manager. "Sir, have you seen Twitter? Your Aerolux racist is trending #1 worldwide, but the video of you confronting the cops is trending #2. We need a statement." Robert looked at the phone, then at his daughter settling in. The war wasn't over. It was just moving to the internet. By the time Flight 882 reached cruising altitude over the Atlantic, the world below was already on fire. In the Aerolux headquarters in Dallas, the Situation Room, a glass-walled conference center usually reserved for crash investigations or hostile takeovers, was buzzing with frantic energy. Screens lined the walls, displaying waterfalls of data from Twitter, TikTok, and international news networks. At the head of the mahogany table sat Robert Sinclair. He had flown back to Dallas on his private jet immediately after securing Mabel's safety. He hadn't slept. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and a coffee cup sat untouched near his right hand. "Report," Robert barked. Leonard Vance, the airline's general counsel, a man who billed $200 an hour and was worth every penny, stood up. He looked pale. "It's a mixed bag, Robert. The initial hashtag, Nasham, boycott Aerolux, was trending #1 globally for 3 hours. People were burning their frequent flyer cards on TikTok. But," Leonard clicked a remote, changing the graph on the main screen from red to green. "Since the second video leaked, the one Chloe recorded of you confronting the police, the narrative has flipped. The new trend is Sinclair stand. People are calling you a hero, but they still want blood for the officers and the woman." "They shall have it," Robert said, his voice dropping to a subsonic rumble. "What about the Priest woman?" "Gwendolyn Priest has been bailed out," Leonard said, sliding a dossier across the table. "Her husband, Charles Priest, posted the bond. $50,000. She's currently at their penthouse in Manhattan. Her lawyer has already issued a statement claiming she was the victim of emotional distress and that Mabel provoked the incident." Robert laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Provoked? By sleeping in a hoodie? They're going to play the victim card, Robert. Charles Priest is powerful. He runs Priest Capital. He has friends in the Senate. He's already calling board members, threatening to short Aerolux stock if we don't issue an apology to his wife and drop the charges." Robert stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Dallas skyline. He knew Charles Priest. They moved in the same circles. Charles was a shark, a man who viewed people as assets or liabilities. "Get Charles on the phone," Robert said. "Sir." Leonard hesitated. Legal advisors against direct contact during active litigation. "I said, get him on the phone. Put it on speaker." A minute later, the room filled with the smooth, condescending voice of Charles Priest. "Robert," Charles said, sounding bored, "I assume you're calling to apologize for the spectacle your employees caused. My wife is traumatized. We're preparing a lawsuit for $10 million for defamation and false imprisonment." Robert stared at the speakerphone like it was a venomous snake. "Charles, listen to me very carefully. You have exactly 1 hour to withdraw that threat, or I will destroy you." There was a pause. Then Charles laughed. "Destroy me?" "Robert, don't be dramatic. You run an airline. I run the market. I can tank your share price by noon. And I can pull the Aerolux pension fund, valued at $4 billion, out of Priest Capital by 12:01, Robert countered. "I can also release the full cockpit voice recorder audio from the gate, which picked up your wife calling my daughter a racial slur that wasn't on the passenger videos. Do you want the world to hear what Gwendolyn really thinks about those people? How will your investors react? How will your diverse board of directors react?" Silence. The air in the room grew heavy. "You wouldn't," Charles whispered. "I absolutely would," Robert said. "You have a choice, Charles. You can stand by your wife, who just committed a felony on national television, or you can cut your losses. If you continue to fund her legal defense, I will view it as a declaration of war by Priest Capital against Aerolux. And I promise you, I have more lawyers, more money, and right now I have the moral high ground. The public hates her, Charles. If you stand next to her, they will hate you too." Robert let the threat hang in the air. He knew Charles. The man loved money more than he loved Gwendolyn. He loved his reputation more than his marriage. "What do you want?" Charles asked, his voice defeated. "I want a public statement from you condemning her actions," Robert demanded. "I want you to stop funding her defense, and I want you to know that I am personally suing her for damages to my company's brand. If she has any assets in her name, I'm coming for them." "She has the Hamptons house and her jewelry collection," Charles said quickly, the betrayal coming as easily as breathing. "The rest is in trust." "Good to know," Robert said. "Goodbye, Charles." He ended the call. Leonard looked at Robert with a mix of fear and awe. "Did you just convince a man to feed his wife to the wolves?" Leonard asked. "He didn't need convincing," Robert said, sitting back down. "He just needed a push. Now, let's talk about the police. What's the status of Officer Miller and Officer Kowalski?" "Placed on administrative leave, pending an internal affairs investigation," Leonard reported. "The union is protecting them. They claim they were following protocol based on the flight crew's report." "Protocol?" Robert slammed his hand on the table. "Protocol involves verifying a ticket, not dislocating a teenager's shoulder. I want the body cam footage. I want their disciplinary records. If Miller has ever so much as raised his voice at a jaywalker, I want to know about it. We are going to make sure they never wear a badge again." "It will be a fight, sir. The police union is strong." "So am I," Robert said. "And I'm a father who just watched a man assault his child. Burn them down, Leonard. Burn it all down." 3 weeks later, the fervor hadn't died down. If anything, it had mutated into a national conversation about bias, privilege, and policing. Mabel had arrived safely in London, but her vacation was cut short. She returned to New York to be present for the legal proceedings. She didn't want to hide. She wanted to face them. The setting wasn't a courtroom yet. It was a high-rise conference room in Midtown Manhattan for Gwendolyn Priest's deposition. Gwendolyn sat at the end of the long glass table. She looked different. The shine was gone. Her hair, usually a helmet of hairspray, was slightly frayed. She wore a grey suit that looked understated, almost mousy. Without Charles's money flowing freely, he had indeed filed for divorce 3 days after the incident, citing irreconcilable differences to protect his firm. She was relying on a court-appointed narrative that she was a confused victim. Robert sat across from her, flanked by Leonard. Mabel sat next to her father. She wore a simple blazer and jeans, her arm still in a soft brace from the sprain Miller had inflicted. Leonard clicked his pen. The videographer stated the date and time. "Mrs. Priest," Leonard began. "State your full name for the record." "Gwendolyn Marie Priest," she said, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Priest, on the date of June 14th, did you demand that Mabel Sinclair vacate seat 1A? I asked if there was a mistake," Gwendolyn said, looking at her hands. "I didn't demand." "We have video evidence, Mrs. Priest," Leonard said, sliding a tablet across the table. "This is from Mr. David Chen's phone. It shows you shouting, 'Get up!' and 'You don't belong here.' Do you deny saying those things?" "I was stressed," Gwendolyn snapped, a flash of her old self appearing. "I have anxiety when I fly. I needed that specific seat for my My condition. Your condition, Leonard raised an eyebrow. Is racism a medical condition now? Objection. Gwendolyn's lawyer, a ragged man who looked like he hadn't slept, shouted, argumentative. I'll rephrase, Leonard said calmly. Why did you assume Ms. Sinclair didn't belong in first class? Gwendolyn shifted in her chair. She looked at Mabel. For the first time, she actually looked at the girl she had tormented. She saw the intelligence in Mabel's eyes, the quiet strength. She was wearing a hoodie, Gwendolyn muttered. Speak up, please, Leonard said. She was wearing a hoodie and mismatched socks, Gwendolyn burst out. People in first class dress a certain way. We have standards. She looked like a thug. Mabel flinched. Robert's hand tightened into a fist under the table, but he remained silent. A thug, Leonard repeated. Because of a sweatshirt. Tell me, Mrs. Priest, have you ever seen Mark Zuckerberg or any tech billionaire? They wear hoodies. Have you ever called the police on them? That's different, Gwendolyn said. Why? Leonard pressed. Why is it different? Because they are... Gwendolyn stopped herself. She realized the trap. Because they are white? Leonard finished for her. I am not a racist, Gwendolyn cried, tears streaming down her face. I donate to charity. I have friends who are colored. The room went deadly silent. The use of the dated, offensive term hung in the air like a foul odor. Leonard didn't even blink. He just looked at the camera. Let the record show the witness used a racial slur. I didn't mean it like that, Gwendolyn wailed. Mrs. Priest, Leonard continued, relentless. Are you aware that because of your false report, Officer Miller dislocated Ms. Sinclair's shoulder? Are you aware she has had to withdraw from her summer medical internship because of the injury? That's the police's fault, Gwendolyn deflected. I just told them to remove her. I didn't tell them to hurt her. But you lied to them, Leonard said. You told Roger Holloway she threatened you. Did she threaten you? Gwendolyn bit her lip. I felt threatened. Did she speak words of threat? Did she say, I am going to hurt you? No, Gwendolyn whispered. So you lied. I exaggerated. You lied, Leonard hammered. And that lie is a felony. And now, let's discuss your finances. You are being sued for $5 million in compensatory damages and $20 million in punitive damages. Your husband has frozen your joint accounts. Do you have the means to pay this judgment? Gwendolyn broke. She put her head in her hands and sobbed. I have nothing. Charles locked me out. He cancelled my credit cards. I'm staying in a hotel in Queens. Please, Mr. Sinclair, please. She looked at Robert. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Just drop the lawsuit. I'm ruined. Robert leaned forward. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. You aren't ruined because of me, Gwendolyn. You're ruined because of who you are. You saw a girl, my daughter, and you decided she was less than human. You tried to take her dignity. The only reason you're crying now is because you got caught. I'll do anything, Gwendolyn begged. I'll do a public apology. I'll do community service. You will do prison time, Robert said coldly. The district attorney is watching this deposition. They are pressing charges for filing a false report and hate crime enhancement. My lawsuit is just to ensure that when you get out, you won't have a penny left to use to hurt anyone else. Gwendolyn stared at him, her face a mask of horror. She realized, finally, that her tears didn't work here. Her privilege had expired. Later that afternoon, the news broke. Roger Holloway, the flight purser, had cut a deal. He testified that Gwendolyn had used racial slurs regarding the flight crew on previous flights, and that he had ignored them to keep her happy. His testimony corroborated the pattern of behavior. Officer Miller was next. The internal affairs investigation, fueled by the pressure from Aerolux's legal team, found that Miller had 3 prior excessive force complaints involving minority youth, all swept under the rug. But with the world watching, the rug was pulled up. Miller was fired and charged with assault in the 3rd degree. The dominoes were falling, and they were landing exactly where they belonged. 6 months later, New York City was dressed in the crisp gold and rust of autumn. Life had moved on for the city, but for the people involved in the incident on Flight 882, the landscape had changed forever. Mabel Sinclair stood outside the federal courthouse. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't brush it away. She was smiling. The verdict had just been read. Gwendolyn Preece was found guilty of filing a false police report and disorderly conduct. While she avoided a lengthy prison sentence, she was sentenced to 6 months in a minimum security facility, 3 years of probation, and 500 hours of community service. But the civil verdict was the real blow. The jury had awarded Mabel $12 million in damages. Since Gwendolyn had no liquid cash after the divorce, the court ordered the liquidation of her personal assets, her jewelry, her art, and her share of the Hamptons estate. Mabel watched as Gwendolyn was led out the side entrance of the courthouse. She wasn't in handcuffs, but she looked smaller, grayer. There were no paparazzi waiting for her anymore. She was yesterday's news, a cautionary tale that society had already digested and discarded. She got into a yellow taxi, alone. No limo. No husband. No entourage. "You okay?" Mabel turned. Her father stood beside her, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. "Yeah," Mabel said, taking a cup. "I feel lighter." "You did good in there, May," Robert said. "I know it wasn't easy testifying." "I had to," Mabel said. She took a sip of the cocoa. "Dad, I've been thinking about the money." "The settlement?" "Yeah, I don't want it." Robert looked at her, surprised. "It's justice, Mabel. It's your compensation." "I don't need it," Mabel said. "You pay my tuition. I have everything I need. But there are kids who don't. Kids who get dragged out of places, or stopped by cops, who don't have a CEO dad to save them." She looked at him with fierce determination. "I want to start a foundation. The Sinclair Justice Initiative. We can use the money to pay for legal defense for people who are wrongfully accused or mistreated by authority figures. I want to help the people Officer Miller hurt before he got to me." Robert felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent his life building an airline, building an empire of metal and sky. But looking at his daughter, he realized he had built something far more important, a good person. "Okay," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll do it, and Aerolux will match the funds, dollar for dollar." Mabel hugged him, burying her face in his coat, just like she had on the jet bridge. But this time, the tears were happy ones. A week later, Mabel was at JFK Airport again. She was heading back to London to finish the trip that had been interrupted. She walked through the terminal, her carry-on rolling behind her. She wore a hoodie, a new one, bright purple, and jeans. She approached the Aerolux check-in counter. The agent behind the desk looked up and froze. It was a new agent, young and eager. "Miss Sinclair?" the agent asked, eyes widening. "It is an honor to have you flying with us." "Just Mabel is fine," she smiled. "We have you in 1 May, of course," the agent said, "and Captain Williams asked me to tell you that the entire crew has been briefed to ensure you have a perfect flight." Mabel took the boarding pass. She walked through security, passing the spot where Officer Miller used to stand. He wasn't there. He was currently awaiting his own trial, working security at a warehouse in New Jersey, stripped of his badge and his power. She walked down the jet bridge. The memories tried to creep in, the smell of the tunnel, the echo of boots. But she pushed them away. She was in control now. She boarded the plane. The head flight attendant, a kind woman named Sarah, greeted her by name. "Welcome back, Mabel." Mabel walked to seat 1A. She stowed her bag. She sat down in the plush leather chair. It felt comfortable. It felt like hers. As the plane taxied to the runway, Mabel looked out the window. She saw a baggage handler tossing suitcases onto a cart. She saw a fuel truck driving by, and in the distance she saw the skyline of New York, a city of millions of stories. She pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app. She had an idea for a story she wanted to write, something about a girl who finds her voice in the strangest of places. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Aerolux Flight 882 to London. We are cleared for takeoff. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The engines roared to life, a deep, powerful sound that vibrated through the floor. The plane surged forward, picking up speed, faster and faster, until the ground fell away. Mabel watched the earth recede. The cars became specks, the buildings became toys. She was flying, above the clouds, above the hate, above the Gwendolyn Prices of the world. She adjusted her headphones, closed her eyes, and finally, peacefully, went to sleep. Mabel's story is a stark reminder that while prejudice still exists, it cannot survive when confronted with truth, courage, and the unwavering support of family. Gwendolyn Price and Officer Miller learned the hard way that dignity is not determined by a hoodie or a bank account, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, is a force of nature. Mabel didn't just reclaim her seat. She reclaimed her narrative, turning a moment of trauma into a movement for others. If you enjoyed this story of high-flying drama and satisfying karma, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Share this video with a friend who loves seeing bullies get exactly what they deserve. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.